Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Buenos días, damas y caballeros. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sung-Hoon Kim, and I'll be your MC for this event. I'd like to welcome you to the International Civil Aviation Organization's 40th Assembly SkyTalks. During a period of 2 weeks, we have 68 presentations by industry-leading experts in aviation, and we have a whole array of presentations for you. So please visit the ICAO site on YouTube for more information. I'd like to remind you that we're coming to you live, so please refrain from using your cell phones and make sure to put them on vibrating mode. At the end of the presentation, I would invite all of you to come up and ask questions. Today is day 5, session number 3, and we continue in our theme of green. We're going to talk more specifically about the implementation of CORSIA, or the Carbon Offsetting Reduction Scheme for International Travel. The title is okay, that was the title. The presenter today is Manuel Caballero Alarcón, Environment Officer here at ATB. So without further ado, please welcome Manuel.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to give this presentation today. Good morning to everybody. Welcome to this SkyTalk. As it's been said, today we are going to talk about the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, what we know as CORSIA. But before we get into the detail of how CORSIA works and how it's been implemented, we have to start by asking ourselves the question of why are we talking about CORSIA today? In order to answer that question, we have to go back to the 37th ICAO Assembly back in 2010, where ICAO member states made the decision to adopt 2 ICAO aspirational goals on climate change. One of them was the one we know as carbon neutral growth from 2020. In order to achieve this aspirational goal, ICAO member states agreed on a basket of measures, of mitigation actions to reduce CO2 emissions from international aviation. This basket of measures includes measures on aircraft technology, operational improvements, and sustainable aviation fuels. 3 years ago, at the 39th ICAO Assembly, ICAO member states recognized the progress made in the implementation of these measures, but at the same time, they also acknowledged that that progress was not enough in the short term to achieve the carbon neutral growth 2020 goal. This is the reason why ICAO member states agreed on the implementation of CORSIA. By doing so, CORSIA became the first global market-based measure scheme for any industry sector, and it became part of the basket of measures, being a measure complementary to the measures already included in the basket. So let's now move to see a brief overview of how CORSIA works. We should start with what we know as phased implementation of CORSIA. Assembly Resolution A39.3, which is our reference for the purpose of CORSIA, says that CORSIA will be implemented in a series of phases. Starting in 2021, we have a pilot phase that runs from 2021 to 2023, followed by a first phase that runs from 2024 to 2026. It is important to note that these 2 phases are voluntary in nature. This means that ICAO member states have to inform ICAO of their intention to voluntarily participate in these 2 phases. From 2027 until 2035, we have the second phase. And here, the conditions for participation are slightly different, because now some states will be required to participate on the basis of their international aviation activity as measured by RTKs, or revenue ton kilometers, in year 2018. That being said, there are provisions that exempt certain states from participating in the second phase of CORSIA. That applies to least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. But of course, these states, as any other state, are encouraged to participate in the scheme. So as of today, what we know is that there are 81 ICAO member states that have expressed their intention to voluntarily participate in CORSIA. This number of states has increased significantly since the previous assembly, and we expect that the list will continue expanding. So, of course, we encourage more states to join CORSIA, because the more states are participating in CORSIA, the stronger the environmental integrity of the scheme is, because more emissions are covered by the scheme. So, in the previous slide, we have said that the pilot phase of CORSIA starts in 2021, but actually implementation of CORSIA has already started. As of 1st of January of 2019, states who have operators conducting international flights need to check with their operators that they are doing the monitoring, reporting, and verification of the CO2 emissions from those flights. So this is something that applies already, as I said, from 1st of January of this year. From 2021, when the pilot phase of CORSIA starts, then in addition to implementing the MRV system of CORSIA, states will also have to check if their aeroplane operators have offsetting requirements under CORSIA, and if that is the case, that they meet those offsetting requirements. I have mentioned a minute ago the concept of offsetting requirements. Assembly Resolution A39.3 tells us how these CO2 offsetting requirements are calculated for the different aeroplane operators. Basically, in a given year, an aeroplane operator's offsetting requirements is the result of multiplying the operator's annual CO2 emissions times a growth factor. Regarding this growth factor, Assembly Resolution A39.3 gives us details on how to calculate it. Here, it is important to note that from 2021 all the way to 2029, the calculation of the growth factor is done applying the so-called 100% sectorial approach. That means that there is only one growth factor that applies to all aeroplane operators participating in the scheme. However, from 2030, we start introducing an individual factor in the calculation of the growth factor. That means that from 2030, each aeroplane operator will have a different growth factor. Another important design feature of CORSIA is the implementation of a periodic review. Assembly Resolution A39.3 says that from 2022 and every 3 years, there will be a periodic review of CORSIA. That periodic review will allow the Council to gather information on how CORSIA is being implemented, get lessons learned, and if needed, propose amendments to the scheme in the future. In addition to this periodic review, it is also scheduled to have a special review at the end of 2032, where the Council will assess whether it is necessary to expand the timeline of CORSIA beyond 2035, or if the scheme can be finished in that year, in 2035. So let's now move to the development of a framework for CORSIA implementation. How that framework has been set up in order to facilitate the implementation of CORSIA. Here we have to talk about the 3 so-called implementation components. The first and most important are the standards and recommended practices, what we know as SARPs, that are included in Volume 4 of Annex 16 to the International Civil Aviation Convention. So these SARPs tell all stakeholders involved in the implementation of CORSIA what they have to do and when they have to do it. In addition, we have guidance that is provided to these stakeholders in an ICAO doc, which is a ICAO doc 9501, which is the Environmental Technical Manual. Volume 4 of this ICAO doc focuses specifically on providing guidance for the implementation of the standards in Annex 16 Volume 4. And then we have the CORSIA implementation elements. These are 5 implementation elements that are reflected in 14 ICAO documents. These ICAO documents contain information which is essential for the implementation of the standards in Annex 16 Volume 4. Here, I would just like to take a minute to recognize the amazing work that has been done by experts who have developed these 3 implementation components. Experts who have been nominated from states, from the industry, and also from civil society. I would like to mention briefly about the CORSIA implementation elements, because this is an aspect which is quite specific of CORSIA. As I said, these 5 implementation elements are reflected in 14 ICAO documents. The information in these ICAO documents has to be approved by the Council. Only then these ICAO documents will be made available. If you go to our website, you will see that some of these ICAO documents are already available there. Some of them are being prepared, and they will be ready in time to allow for the implementation of the standards that are relevant to these ICAO documents that are still in progress. So let's now move to focus on how CORSIA is being implemented in the years 2019 and 2020. And as I said before, what we are doing since 1st of January 2019 is to implement the MRV system in CORSIA. Why, if the phased implementation of CORSIA starts in 2021, why is it important to do MRV from 2019? The answer is very simple. The CO2 emissions from international aviation activity in 2019 and 2020 will serve as the basis for the calculation of the so-called CORSIA baseline. From 2021 onwards, doing the MRV is still very important because it will allow us to calculate the CO2 offsetting requirements of the different operators participating in the scheme. So here in this slide, we have tried to summarize how the annual MRV cycle works in CORSIA. If we start from the top left of the slide, we see that there is an interaction between the aeroplane operator and the state where the operator is registered. The objective of that interaction is to have an operator's emissions monitoring plan, which is the framework that sets, so to speak, the rules of the game of how the operator is going to do the monitoring of its CO2 emissions from international flights. Then, once the emissions monitoring plan is approved, the operator starts this cycle, which is reflected in the right-hand side of the slide. In this cycle, the operator, on 1st of January of any given year, starts monitoring the CO2 emissions from its international flights. And the related information is included in another important document for the MRV cycle, which is the emissions report. This emissions report is subject to a third-party verification, and then once the information in the emissions report has been verified, the emissions report and the related verification report is submitted to the state. Then we move again to the left-hand side of the slide, and what the state does is to compile the information from the different operators registered in the state, consolidates that information, and submits it to ICAO. And then this cycle is repeated every year. So let me reflect for a minute in the emissions monitoring plan. As I said, the emissions monitoring plan is a cooperative tool between the operator and the state, and it sets the framework by which the operator will do the monitoring and reporting of its CO2 emissions. The emissions monitoring plan is a document that the operator has already submitted for the state's approval on 28th of February of this year, and the state has had roughly 2 months for the approval of these emissions monitoring plans. The emissions monitoring plan, in its capacity as framework document, is not a document subject to periodic updates. However, if the operator, in doing the monitoring of the CO2 emissions, makes some significant change to the way that monitoring is being done, that change has to be reflected in an update to the emissions monitoring plan that has to be resubmitted to the state for approval. Another important document in the MRV system is the operator's emissions report. And this document is a document that, unlike the previous one, has to be prepared on an annual basis by the operator. Because what the operator does with the emissions report is basically compile all the information on CO2 emissions for a given year. So obviously, it has to be prepared and submitted to the state on a yearly basis. So this document is key, as I said before, because in 2019-2020, it will contain all the information that will allow us to calculate the CORSIA baseline. And from 2021, it will contain the information that will allow us to calculate the operator's CO2 offsetting requirements. Under the MRV system in CORSIA, there is also a verification process. That verification process affects the operator's emissions reports. The information in those emissions reports has to be verified by a third-party verification body that will have to comply with a series of requirements. Some of those requirements are included in relevant ISO standards, and some of them are CORSIA specific. In any case, all the CORSIA verification requirements are detailed in Appendix 6 of Annex 16, Volume 4. Here we have tried to describe in a nutshell how the verification process works in CORSIA. The operator is invited to perform a voluntary internal pre-verification in order to prepare the data before it engages in steps 2 and 3 of this slide in the interaction with the verification body. When the verification body has verified the information and there is an agreement between the operator and the verification body, both the emissions report and the verification report are submitted to the state. And then the state is invited to perform an order of magnitude check just to make sure that information submitted in the emissions report is consistent with the state's own information sources. So let's move now to the very important section of this presentation where we see how states are being supported for CORSIA implementation. What are the capacity building activities that are being implemented? Since the approval of CORSIA in the previous assembly in 2016, this slide lists all the ICAO CORSIA events that have been organized. I would like to bring to your attention, for example, the ICAO regional seminars, where what we do is we go to every ICAO region and we have a forum on the one hand to provide up-to-date information to states on how CORSIA is progressing, and on the other hand, also to have a forum for information exchange and exchange of experiences and lessons learned among the states. Some of these events are covering the whole CORSIA, but some of them are specific of a given topic important for CORSIA. For example, the 2018 seminar on carbon markets is an example of this. I would like now to refer to the ACT-CORSIA program. The ICAO ACT-CORSIA program refers to the assistance, capacity building, and training for CORSIA. It is a program that was launched in July 2018, so right after the Council adopted the SARPs in Annex 16, Volume 4. And the objective of this program is to ensure a coordinated approach when providing assistance and capacity building to states on CORSIA. In the first phase of this program, which just finished at the beginning of this year, we have had as many as 15 donor states supporting 98 states. It is an impressive achievement, taking into account the very short time that was provided for the establishment of the program. And here I would like to recognize the enormous work undertaken by those donor states who have provided their experts and their time to have on-site trainings and maximize the impact of this program. I have mentioned the first phase of the program, where you have seen you can see in this slide the donor states, recipient states, as well as the map with a summary of all the training activities that have been undertaken. But ACT-CORSIA consists of a sequence of phases. Phase 2, which is now in the process of being implemented in 2019, will focus on emissions reporting and verification, because those are the relevant CORSIA provisions that will start being implemented in 2020. And the Phase 3 that will run in 2020 and 2021 still will have a focus on emissions reporting and verification, but will also provide up-to-date information on very important topics such as the eligibility of emissions units and fuels for CORSIA purposes. In the context of the capacity building activities, I would also like to refer to the ICAO CORSIA verification course that has been developed by ICAO in the context of its global aviation training program. And the objective of this course is to inform verification bodies of the verification requirements in CORSIA. Therefore, the target audience are verification bodies which are interested in providing their services under CORSIA. I would like to mention, of course, a very important and powerful tool, which is the ICAO CORSIA website, where you can find all the relevant information related to CORSIA implementation. So anything from the SARPs in Annex 16 Volume 4 to all these 14 ICAO documents related to the 5 implementation elements. And of course, you will also include all the information related to ACT-CORSIA, such as the CORSIA body partnerships that have so far been established, as well as all materials from the events that have been held on CORSIA in the last 3 years, and also all sorts of outreach materials and online tutorials on CORSIA. So let's finish this presentation talking about the key milestones that have been achieved so far, as well as next steps. When it comes to key milestones, this slide tries to summarize what we have seen in the last 20 minutes. So what we have achieved so far, thanks to the cooperation of ICAO member states and its experts and their experts, is that we have the standards and recommended practices in Annex 16 Volume 4, which are applicable from 1st of January 2019. We have the guidance in ETM Volume 4. We have the 5 implementation elements that are being set in place. For example, we have the 2019 version of the ICAO CORSIA CO2 estimation and reporting tool, which allows operators to apply simplified monitoring and reporting procedures as detailed in Annex 16 Volume 4. We have the emissions units criteria that have been approved by the Council this year. We have the technical advisory body that is already doing its work to assess emissions units programs and issue recommendations to the Council on the eligibility of these programs. And of course, as we have seen a minute ago, we have the ACT-CORSIA program that is ongoing and now entering into its second phase. When it comes to future work, of course, ACT-CORSIA has to continue its implementation. We need to ensure that all those states that need assistance and capacity building for CORSIA implementation are being properly supported and assisted. The TAP needs to finish its first round of assessment of emissions units programs and issue its recommendations to the Council. We need to do further work on the issue of eligibility of CORSIA eligible fuels. And we have to complete the development and deployment of the CORSIA Central Registry, which is key for the submission of information from states to ICAO under CORSIA, and for which a specific SkyTalk presentation has been delivered earlier on last week and is available in our website. So I would just like to remind you all the information in a snapshot that can be found in the ICAO CORSIA website. And of course, I would like to invite you to check the 2019 ICAO environmental report that was published right before the Assembly and is available both online and in hard copies. So with this, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And of course, if you have any question, please feel free to come here and ask it from the microphone in front. Thank you very much.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everybody. Well, my question about how many verifier is approved, and the number of verifier could fulfill all the requirement for verification for all the operator all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question and for bringing to our attention a very important element, of course, implementation. So if we look into the standards and recommended practices in Annex 16 Volume 4, it is said that, as I said, Appendix 6 of Annex 16 Volume 4 sets the requirements for a verification body to be accredited to perform verification services in CORSIA. Annex 16 Volume 4 also says that states have to submit to ICAO those verification bodies that have been accredited in the state. So what ICAO does is to compile the information received from the different states that, of course, coordinate with the respective national accreditation bodies. We consolidate that information and publish it in the ICAO CORSIA website. That is one of those ICAO documents that I referred to as one of the CORSIA implementation elements. The first edition of that ICAO document, where the list of verification bodies is included, is already available in the website. I do not know my mind. I don't know the exact number of verification bodies. But what is important to keep in mind is that if we access the website now, we will see an initial list based on the submissions from states. As we get more submissions from states, that document is going to be updated. So it is a living document. Now we may have a given number of verification bodies. In the next edition of that document, that number may have expanded. So it all depends on the submissions that we receive from states. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Morning. My question is about state aviation authorities and being able to do CORSIA verifications instead of relying on information from these independent bodies. Is there something ICAO can provide for especially small developing countries for this?
Thank you for your question. Well, the framework that we have now for CORSIA implementation is what the standards and recommended practices in Annex 16, Volume 4 tell us. So there we have this requirement for third-party verification. That requires, of course, that the operators can access verification bodies that have been accredited by the national accreditation bodies of the different ICAO member states. So this is, let's say, the basic framework that has been set. States, operators, and verification bodies need to comply with that framework. Then the particulars of the relationships that are established between aeroplane operators and verification bodies, that falls more in the side of the let's say, a commercial relationship between these entities. So, of course, I guess that there are different implementation modalities that can be explored, but the basic framework is the one provided by, to us by Annex 16, Volume 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel Caballero.
Thank you.